Join us just before Thanksgiving as we drove down to Plymouth, Massachusetts to explore, among other things, the Plimoth Patuxet Museums. We started our day by climbing up to get a good look of Plymouth Bay and checking out the entire scope of the recreated Plymouth Plantation colony. Then it was time to actually step foot into the colony itself and explore, wondering what we would see. Would it just be simple vegetable gardens, or would it be something much more? Almost immediately, it proved to be much more, as quickly one of us was drafted into the local militia, where we were quickly trained and drilled in all sorts of work with the pike. The pike was a long, heavy thrusting spear used by foot soldiers and used in formations like the pike square for defense against cavalry and other infantry. It was a prominent weapon in European warfare from the late Middle Ages all the way up to the early modern period, particularly among units like those that would have been stationed at the Plymouth colony. From there, we checked out some of the living quarters, wondering what life would have been like on a daily basis for these settlers back in 1620 and the decades that soon followed. What would they have done? What would their bedrooms have looked like? What would they have done with their free time? Of course, free time wasn't really in abundance. They had crops to tend to and livestock to take care of. But what little free time there may have been could have been used playing the famous hoop and stick game. It's a lot harder than it looks. Of course, you could also spend your time dancing, and it didn't always have to be complicated and hard to learn how to do some of these dance moves.
How do you do that?
We also learned about the native peoples and how they went about putting together their food products and meals, how they went about crafting water vessels, and even their homes. Interpreters were on hand to help provide information and context for all sorts of questions.
The Wampanoag lived in this V2 in the winter, and there were 15 or so people who would sleep in this house. This V2 is called a longhouse, and the longhouse is the winter home back when the Pilgrims were around. Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth at Plymouth Rock.
Ah, good old Plymouth Rock. Infamously nowhere near as big as people would expect. After briefly checking out this venerable sham of a landmark, we meandered downtown, checking out the shops and taking a seat down on a bench by the bay, checking out the views. We then crossed the street to find ourselves something to eat and stopped off at Mamma Mia restaurant. This place is clearly pretty popular with the tourists and people coming into town, and they have plenty on offer. Of course, with these two, there doesn't need to be a whole lot on offer, as long as they've got some good old-fashioned cheese pizza. It's pretty hot and delicious. Freshly refueled by some delicious pizza at Mamma Mia's, it was time to get back up and go back to exploring Plymouth, Massachusetts. We soon enough made our way to Burial Hill Cemetery in the middle of Plymouth in hopes of finding the marker for my 12th great-grandfather, William Brewster, one of the leaders of the Pilgrims in 1620 and the architect of the Mayflower Compact. From there, we made our way back down to the waterfront for our very last stop of the day. It was time to step aboard the Mayflower, or at least the Mayflower II, the recreation of the historic ship that set sail in 1620. Upon climbing aboard the ship, we were able to check out artifacts and recreations of all the sorts of instruments, tools, and everything else on board the ship, including sleeping quarters. Those were cramped spaces on the ship for this lengthy voyage across the Atlantic Ocean more than 400 years ago. Thanks for coming with us on our trip to Plymouth. Have you been? Do you plan to go? Either way, we'll see you on our next trip.